Hello, everybody, and welcome to the AMPM Podcast. My name is Manny Coats, and I will be your host, and this is the show where we discuss all things Amazon private label and how to generate recurring revenue streams 24 hours per day during the AM and the PM, hence the name of the show. Get it? AMPM Podcast. As a matter of fact, I was watching an air show, and while I was in awe of all these near crashes, the pilots were just zipping by each other. While I was watching these pilots do these incredible feats, I was making money. How cool is that? Pretty cool, I think. Hey guys, I am here with John Hadden. He's a 27-year-old, originally from Oregon, but now lives in Puerto Rico, and that's important, and you guys are going to find out why in just a few minutes. But he's been selling on Amazon since 2014, currently a 7-figure seller, and he's going to be on the show today to talk about how he only pays 4% income tax for his business and 0% income tax for his financial investments. That's got me super curious. John, how are you doing, buddy?
I'm doing well, Manny. How about you?
I could be doing better if I'm only paying 4% income tax.
It's pretty nice. It's pretty nice.
So let's talk about that. Well, actually, so you're doing 7 figures right now. Is that on Amazon or is that just general e-commerce?
That's pretty much all Amazon. I have my own website, and we sell internationally to Europe mostly and the US, but I have yet to kill it quite the way I want to on Facebook and with Google Ads. So that's a big pain point that we're currently working on. But Amazon's my bread and butter for sure.
Awesome. Is that private label? Is that what you guys do? Or,
oh yeah. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Cool. How many SKUs would you say you have?
Only 14. And
14.
The majority of our revenue comes from about 5.
Okay, cool.
But yeah.
Before we get into some tax stuff, and I know guys, typically when we talk about tax stuff, it bores people, but this is super cool because if you're doing any kind of volume, and you're paying if the government is taking half of your revenue, this is something that you're going to be super interested in. And I found out about this at a conference that we were at and just bumped into some people and they started mentioning this thing about Puerto Rico. I'm like, what? Is that even a real thing? And so John's going to talk to us about this. But do you have any kind of advice or hacks or anything that helps you when you launch something, something maybe you haven't talked about before that it's kind of pretty cool for getting you ahead of everybody else?
Yeah, actually, my employee, Clay, has been doing a great job finding unicorns. And essentially, we're pulling a lot of data from Unicorn Smasher, a lot of different sources, and we're uploading them into this visualization software called Klaviyo. Not quite sure how it's pronounced or spelled. He's doing most of the work. We can probably upload a link after this, but it's really cool. You can set exactly which data points you want to see, like maybe the growth of the market or the revenue or the margins, and you can lay it all out visually, and you can see, maybe there's 5 or 10 unicorns in one little thing, and then one way up in the far top right or top left corner that shows that it's a unicorn amongst unicorns, and that's where we focus. And it's pretty cool. So I've been astounded by that software.
Nice. Okay, I'm gonna have to check that out. I've heard of it. So yeah, well, cool. So you have multiple companies, right? You said I'm looking at some details on you, and it says you've got a hoverboard company, a fidget spinner company, a skincare company, electronics company, data monetization company, and you do some charity work. What are all of these things on Amazon?
No. So I'm a very successful failed entrepreneur. My first 2 Amazon businesses didn't make a profit and didn't work out very well. And then I started my current Amazon business, which is doing well. And when the hoverboard thing started, I saw Justin Bieber on Vine back when Vine was cool, riding a hoverboard, and my soon-to-be business partner, but at that time friend, said, "Hey man, we should sell these." So I looked at it. We started sourcing them, selling them. It worked up. It blew up in popularity, and then they started blowing up
in real life.
In real life, luckily ours never did because I know how to source properly from China. But yeah, so that was kind of we blew up in popularity, blew up literally, and then the company kind of blew up because of chargebacks, and people, even though the boards were performing as they should have been, people wanted refunds. So shut shop on that. The fidget spinner thing, kind of same thing, trying to catch the trends, want to be a fidget spinner empire and, trying to get ahead of everybody else. And there's no quick way to success. So all of those have kind of failed, but the data monetization company is going well, working on that now. It's pre-revenue.
Nice.
Yeah, really, Amazon's my bread and butter, man. I'm a very successful failed entrepreneur.
I think anybody who's been super successful on Amazon has had those failures. I've talked about those, I think, on the very, very first podcast where, my first product was a failure as well. You just got to keep pushing through. Yeah. And it sounds like you've got some really cool stuff because, let's jump into this. You live in Puerto Rico right now. Where'd you live before that?
I moved around, I suppose, but Oregon before that, most recently.
Okay. Why'd you move to Puerto Rico?
Well, after I graduated college from Oregon State, my now ex-wife and I moved to China for about 2 years, and that's where I started my own company and got into all this. Moved back to Oregon, and I was scaling rapidly, and basically started my company with $200. I don't have a rich uncle. I just did it all on my own. And cash flow was king, as most everybody listening at this point would know. So, I had $200, sold it, and then I had $400. So I bought $400 worth of stuff, sold it. And, before I knew it, I was doing pretty well and had $100,000 in inventory. And then tax season came around, and I had zero money in the bank. And Uncle Sam was like, your inventory on hand is considered profit, which I didn't know. Like most people that just get started in their own company, they have no idea what taxes even are. And I was one of those ignorant people. So I basically owed Uncle Sam $40,000, had nothing in the bank, and was like, do you accept payment in forms of hugs or baby products, which is what I sell in? And unfortunately, they don't. So that was a pain point where at that point, the world already seemed smaller to me. I'd traveled a lot, been to a lot of different places. And at that point, I started kind of looking for, one, Oregon was cold, and I was not used to that after living in the tropics. And I knew I didn't want to spend the rest of my life in Oregon, neither did my wife. So I started just looking at places, and we had a set of criteria, and one of them was, if it's tax friendly, kind of like, Texas or Florida, that would be an added bonus. And then I stumbled across Puerto Rico, which is a tax haven. It's one of the only places in the world that an American citizen can go and not pay federal income tax. If you live in China, like I did, or Germany, like I did, no matter how much money you make, if it's over X amount, I forget how much, but I think it's 100,000. If you make money overseas, you have to pay the IRS, which most people know. The only exception to that are U.S. territories, because they are not foreign, but they're not domestic either. They're in this weird little bubble, and they are allowed to have special tax incentives for U.S. citizens. So the U.S. Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico are the only two places that I know of currently. Maybe the Cayman Islands, I don't know. But anyways, it's a pretty cool little spot.
Okay. And so what kind of benefits do you get setting up in Puerto Rico?
So there's two laws that I take advantage of. One is if you're actively involved in something like your own company and you're working on it every day, you're building, and that act, they're called, is Act 20 for an active investment. So Act 20 has some stipulations, but essentially once you meet all of the requirements, which are becoming a bona fide Puerto Rican resident, which is as easy as moving to a different state, you keep your U.S. passport, everything like that. You just go into the DMV, you get a Puerto Rican license, and then you have to be here 183 days a year, which for some people, if you have families or you're really stuck to where you come from, that's tough. But a lot of us digital nomads, that's not the biggest problem in the world, because Puerto Rico's in the Caribbean, and it's beautiful, and the beach is a 2-minute walk from my house, and it's 80 degrees year-round. So for me, living here year-round is not a problem at all. that's pretty much it. And once you meet those requirements, you no longer pay any federal or state income tax, corporate or personal. So wait, I misspoke. I pay 4% corporate. So if my company makes, $100,000 in profit, I pay 4 total.
Wow. Okay. So does the company have to be incorporated anywhere specifically? Can it be anywhere in the U.S. as long as you're living there in Puerto Rico?
So there's a lot of different ways to structure it, and I'm not a lawyer. So anybody listening to this, I suggest that you talk to a lawyer, and I have some recommendations for who on the island I would definitely recommend, because there's great lawyers and there's terrible lawyers, as everybody knows. But there's lots of ways to structure it. The thing that qualifies you is you have to be providing a service to outside of Puerto Rico. So that can be consulting. You could be a trade company. There's lots of different kind of buckets that falls under. But the way I structured my company is I left my entity in the United States, and then I consult for that entity here from my new Puerto Rican entity. So to answer your previous question, yes, you do need to create a Puerto Rican entity. That is what would qualify for Act 20. But your Puerto Rican entity can consult for whatever other entities you have. And, since you're doing all of the work and all of the effort and all of the, all of the work, really, you can move the majority of your profits to this Puerto Rican entity legally, and as long as you're not, trying to cheat the system, it's great. And the added bonus is Puerto Rico's having a really hard time. So, morally, I have no problem paying taxes. It's helping my company grow for sure, expanding without cash flow issues. But morally, I really like living in Puerto Rico because their economy is taking a hard hit. And the worse it gets, the more young people, young inspiring entrepreneurs with a lot going for them, they simply move to the States. And it's called a brain drain. And right now, bringing jobs and bringing smart entrepreneurs and bringing money to the island is the point of these tax incentives. So by, taking advantage of this tax, I basically help myself, but I also, one of the requirements is you hire like 2 or 3 employees as well. That used to be a requirement. I think they waived it this year. You'd have to, again, check. For me, I have to have 2 or 3 employees. And that's great, though, because I like it. I get to sit next to my guys. It's not outsourced, and I'm helping the Puerto Rican economy. So,
okay, nice. So you have to, I imagine you have to have an office there, or are you doing this from your home with employees that can work from their homes, or how does that work?
You technically have to have an office, but it could be your home. And your employees can work from their homes. That's totally fine. So you need to designate something as your office, but I think it's the same anywhere else in the States.
What kind of entity do you set up there in Puerto Rico? Does it matter? Can it be an LLC or an S corp or?
I don't. I had an S corp back in the States because it was better tax wise. Here, I don't believe there's a differentiation between C corps and S corps, and I believe the benefit of having an S corp back in the States doesn't exist here. So I have a simple LLC, and it's perfect. The way you structure it doesn't really matter so much.
Okay. How long have you been living in Puerto Rico now?
About a year and a half.
Year and a half. How long? You said that you got to be there. Was it 183 days? 181 days? No, what was it?
183 days, which is
183 days. Bare
minimum. That means that you are, essentially living in Puerto Rico more than you're living anywhere else.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So 183 days. So at what point can somebody move there? Do you have to be there the full 183 days before you can get that tax benefit? Like if I move there right now, right before filing taxes, I wouldn't be able to do that until I've been there the full 183. Is that how it works?
So that's a very specific question. So I moved, I'll just use myself as an example. I moved in June of 2016. And I was able to spend 183 days of 2016 in Puerto Rico. I made the cutoff by I think a month. And because I was there for the year of 2016 for more than 183 days, I met the qualification. So for that year, 2016, the first year I moved there, from the date that you first say that you're opening your business, even if you don't have, this status or whatever, because it takes a while to go through the bureaucracy of getting your LLC assigned this Act 20 status. However, it's retroactive to the date that you first filed the application and the date that you first started working there. So pretty much from the date that I moved here was when I first started saving on taxes. And, if I was to move there in November, however, it wouldn't work because I wouldn't have met the 183 days for 2016. So I would have had to start, essentially making my savings January 1st. So the majority of people that are thinking about doing this, they move at the very beginning of a year. Yeah.
Okay. All right, cool. And then, so you're there full time though? You don't jump back and forth between the U.S. and Puerto Rico?
No, I really like it here. And the other tax incentive, which I haven't spoke of yet, is Act 22, which is far simpler. Essentially, if you're a bona fide Puerto Rican resident, which again is this 183 days, you have 0% income tax on all passive investments. So these are not active investments, but things like capital gains and any sort of passive income that you have. So hedge fund managers and people from Wall Street love coming down here for Act 22. And people that are in their retirement and, just want to not pay taxes, they come down here and they live tax-free. So one of the things I love most about Puerto Rico, besides the weather and the fun vibes, the culture here is really, really cool, is you essentially have this brain drain of the overall Puerto Rican economy, which is a travesty, but you also have this kind of new brain hub starting here of a whole lot of smart people, young entrepreneurs, like I said, hedge fund managers, people from Wall Street come in. We all hang out kind of in the same area of San Juan or, a few other places around the island. And, a lot of great things are swapped back and forth. I imagine it's very similar to how Silicon Valley is or, other hotspots for technology because you meet some fascinating individuals that are into cryptocurrencies or whatever it may be.
Interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
no, that's very cool. So do you just have the one company set up there, or do you set up multiple? Because you mentioned you had all these different companies that you've set up. Do you just have the one entity, or do you have multiple entities there? And can you have more than one entity with this Act? What was it, Act 20?
Yeah, absolutely. You can have more than one entity, and you can have one entity that qualifies for multiple Act 20. Like I said, services. So, let's say it's Acme entity LLC could be have a consulting Act 20 certificate, and it could also have an Act 20 certification for providing goods and services or being a trade organization or something like that. So you can have all those things, but in order to make my life simple, I got mine for consulting. So any sort of service that I do outside of Puerto Rico, for example, recruiting for FEMA, which since Hurricane Maria has been necessary. And so I'm essentially recruiting for FEMA, which is a non-Puerto Rican entity, and I'm providing them my services, and I bill through my consulting company here. So I just have one entity, one Puerto Rican entity, to make it simple.
Okay. So with Act 22, and I don't know anything about this kind of thing, but if you talked about cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency is going crazy right now. So if you invest in cryptocurrency in the US and a year from now or 2 years from now, it's gone up, 10x, 20x, it seems like it would be a good idea to move to Puerto Rico for at least 6 months before you decide you're ever going to want to sell that, right? Because then you're saying there's no capital gains on that?
Yeah, so before this, I figured you'd ask about that. So before this, I looked it up. So if you have unrealized gains, so let's say right now you're a hedge fund manager in San Francisco for cryptocurrencies, which is exactly the situation a friend of mine is in, and he has a ton of unrealized gains. He got into Ethereum when it was 13 and sold it 380. Those unrealized gains that you made prior to moving to Puerto Rico will be taxed at a 5% capital gains tax. However, as soon as you move to Puerto Rico, any sort of capital gains that you make after that are 0%.
Wow. Okay.
So, yeah.
So how much can you realistically save yourself? Use yourself as an example now that you've moved to Puerto Rico relative to had you stayed in Oregon.
Well, and to answer your previous question too, they're constantly changing these Act 2022 requirements, and I believe you can't just move here for 1 year and then kind of leave. They want you to not just take advantage of this, and they really want you to kind of fall in love with Puerto Rico and become, maybe Puerto Rican, or at least be here. From what I heard, or what I planned on when I first moved here, was to be here for 5 years. And I don't remember if that was a requirement for Act 20 or Act 22, or if it's even still a requirement. Definitely talk to your tax person, but that was a part of it. But to answer your second question, I was in Oregon between self-employment tax, state tax, and federal income tax. Essentially, even if I only made $1,000 in profit, I was getting taxed about 40%. I think it was 39 and change. So now that I've got a 7-figure business and I'm living in San Juan, just imagine 40% of 7 figures is what I'm saving.
Wow. Yeah, that's crazy. Now, you mentioned San Juan. Is that where you would recommend people move? Do you out of the other places in Puerto Rico?
I did a trip around the island when I first came, and just kind of saw every little bit of it. If you like surfing, there's a little surf town that has a whole lot of kind of bums that go and stay for 6 months, and they are, they've got their waitressing job or whatever in New York City, and then they come and live in Rincon for 6 months, and that's got a cool little vibe, but it's very transient, and it's a really small town. But it's in the most beautiful part of the island, and the surfing over there is awesome. San Juan is the biggest city, and I love it because everybody pretty much speaks English. I speak Spanish pretty well, but it's definitely not a requirement for anybody wondering that living in Puerto Rico. And San Juan in the major metro area is especially great. Everybody's pretty educated. Again, these are all American citizens. Most of them have spent a great deal of their time or gone to college in the States or whatever. So I like San Juan because there's a large community here, and there's a lot to do and a lot to see and a lot of good restaurants. A lot of people that have families like Dorado. Dorado's about 30 minutes outside of the city, and there's this Ritz-Carlton of Dorado that this whole community's kind of popped up around, and it's very posh, and you've got these huge houses and nice cars, and for people that like that, that's more of a residential suburb. And where I first lived was Palmas del Mar, which is the palms of the sea, and that was about 45 minutes outside of the city, which is again the same feeling of Dorado kind of. And it's basically built around 5 golf courses, and it's like a gated city, essentially. And, it's crazy. You go in and it's like this wonderland with yachts and with, golf courses and an equestrian center. And it's
nice.
Crazy that you can live your life like that. And not only that, but not pay taxes.
Yeah, that's crazy. So what would be if you were to compare cost of living there to here in the States? I know in the States it varies depending on where you live, but on average, is it similar? Is it massively different?
I would say it's extremely similar. I can only compare it to basically Oregon, which is not going to help a whole lot of people. Let me phrase it a different way. It's much, much, much less expensive than New York City.
Yeah.
But I would say about average to, when you get out into any rural or even like Class B or Class C city, kind of like Portland.
So like a 2-bedroom apartment, if you were to rent something out there, a decent place, what would it cost?
So a decent place, block from the ocean. My buddy's got in a nice building with a security guard. He's paying $2,300 a month for a nice 2-bedroom apartment in the best part of San Juan, a block away from the ocean. And I live about a block away from him, same distance from the ocean, but mine's a 1-bedroom and I'm paying $1,000.
Okay. And if you went out, you go out with your significant other for dinner, and you have a nice dinner with a single drink, what does something like that run?
You're probably paying, if you want to go to a really nice place, you're probably paying $20-$25 for an entree, and a cocktail is going to be about 10.
Okay, and that's a really nice place.
That's a nice place. I mean,
Yeah.
you could probably, if you were to eat at the Ritz, you could probably pay up to $40 or $50 an entree. Right. But really, prices. I mean, I just went to New York for a month, and the prices there were like, wow.
Astronomical. Yeah, especially when you're used to Puerto Rico. Yeah. So it sounds really intriguing, and we've actually talked about this here. We're like, you know what, we've got to really start talking about some tax strategies. And I know somebody who's lived there, grew up there, loves it. And the more people I talk to, I'm hearing the same thing. You've been there now for a little bit. What would be some of the, and I'm asking a lot of questions for myself because I am seriously considering this, but what would be some of the cultural differences that somebody should prepare for when they're coming from the States to there?
Well, island time is definitely a thing, whether it's Hawaii or Fiji or Puerto Rico. Things typically happen a little bit slower on the islands. So that's a thing. It doesn't really bother me much. And as far as how bad island time can get, Puerto Rico is not bad because most people have stuff to do and they're hopping around. You don't find this super slow motion type lifestyle where everybody seems to be like that sloth from Ice Age. It's not that. The city itself is going through a hard time economically. It's safer than most American cities. Well, maybe not safer, but as safe as most American major cities. Crime, is not much of a problem unless you're doing dumb stuff. But what I have to say I love most about Puerto Rico is the mentality here. We just got hit with the worst hurricane that's ever hit the island, and most of the island is still without power. I was without power for basically 2 months. That's why I was kind of in New York. And everybody has this, they say "se levanta," which is like we will rise. And there's this amazing community of Puerto Ricans that I am very much. I like to think I'm a part of, probably not, but they're very welcoming people. They're very warm people, and they have this work hard, play hard attitude, which was very different from my experiences in China, which is a work hard attitude. In China, it's like, hey man, you want to go play basketball? And it's like, no, I gotta do other stuff. I gotta work. It's like, okay, here, every weekend, people are going to the beach, hanging out, playing volleyball, drinking. Pretty much every Friday or Saturday night, you find people from 19 or 20. The drinking age is 18 here. You find people from 19 to 20 all the way up to 50 or 60 out till 10, 11, 12, 1 or 2, all having a good time together. It's very much like a family feel, and Puerto Ricans are very friendly towards other Puerto Ricans. It's like a one giant family. I really appreciate that aspect of it.
Yeah, no, it sounds really cool. What about the infrastructure there for a business in terms of like having stable internet connections, high speed? I mean, everything that you would be accustomed to here, including transportation. Mm-hmm. Is that an issue out there at all?
No, we got Uber here. Sorry, we have Uber here. Let me correct my grammar. And it's super cheap. To get across town, it's typically $6 or so. I have a car. The road systems here are great, although traffic and parking can be a pain. I almost prefer to Uber, when I'm going out for dinner, things like that. There's not great public transit except for Uber. And as far as internet and electricity and stuff goes, unless we get hit with a hurricane, which hasn't happened since 1920.
How was moving to Puerto Rico helped your business in other ways outside of Act 20 and 22?
That's a great question. One of the things that I think I looked forward to most about moving to Puerto Rico was this employee requirement, which again, now that I'm remembering, they have waived it for new companies. So companies grandfathered into the employee requirement like mine, we have to have employees, but new people will not. But that was actually one of the things I was looking forward to most, because I've, like many people probably listening to this podcast, have been dragging their feet on hiring somebody. Because if you look at it the way I did, every $1,000 or $2,000 you pay somebody a week or a month or whatever is $1,000 or $2,000 less in your pocket. And as a self-starter type person, you're like, hell, I can do my own, graphic design, or I can outsource this to Malaysia or whatever it is. So being forced to hire employees was great because it kind of kicked me into gear. And I've gone through a lot of growing pains this last year, unrelated to Amazon, more related to payroll and how to hire good people, how to find good people, how to structure contracts, how to incentivize people so that they're working when you're not standing over their shoulders. Things like that make you less of a solopreneur or whatever they're called, and more of an actual businessman or businesswoman. And kind of being forced to do that was great. And I can't say enough how valuable having a few full-time smart people that are working for you and sitting next to you in the same office. I can't say enough how valuable that's been to my company.
Right. What is, since it's a U.S. territory, does it have the same laws when it comes to minimum wage, or is it totally separate?
Just like every state, it's got its own laws. So, it's a little bit more free than a state because it can kind of waive certain federal laws like income tax. But when it comes to minimum wage, there's definitely a minimum wage here, but it's low.
What is it? Do you know?
I don't know. I don't pay my guys minimum wage. I've got some smart guys working for me that provide a lot of value, but I think it's around 7, or I think as well, because the economy's in a bad pinch, if they're under 25, you can get away with doing even less.
Do you feel like you can get the same skill set in somebody over there that you do in the U.S. at a much better value? Or is it pretty comparable?
That's tough. I'd say it's probably pretty comparable.
Okay.
The cost of living over here is very much similar to that of the States. So you can get cheap work here, but it's not going to do you much good.
Well, the money that you save in taxes more than makes up, especially if you're at a 7-figure level, more than makes up for any kind of salary savings you're looking for.
Yeah,
I would think.
Yeah, before I was at the 7-figure level, I looked at how much I was paying in taxes every year, and then looked at how much I'd have to pay for 5 employees, and even if those 5 employees didn't provide 1 ounce of value, I was still saving money at the end of the day. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. What would be some of the drawbacks, if any, of actually moving to Puerto Rico and doing this?
To be perfectly honest, coming from Oregon, it is a little tough because, to fly home is about 11 hours. So I don't go that often, and I've lived globally for a long time where I don't really feel the need to. But you're living away from your mom and dad, at least me and my sisters. And, if you don't have a good friend group here, and if you're not, talking to the right people and making the right friends, I imagine it can be a pretty lonely existence. I've been lucky. I've found some of the best friends I've ever had here. But it could be lonely, I'm sure.
Yeah, no, sounds good. Well, I have just a couple more questions here, and then I think this is going to be an awesome podcast for everybody.
Cool.
But how long does it take to actually get the Puerto Rican entity set up? Is that a fast process?
Yeah, it's real fast. If you're cooking on it, probably just a few days. I think it's similar to setting up an entity in any state in the States.
Okay. And you would use your attorney that you talked about to kind of set everything up?
Yeah, most of the paperwork here is done in Spanish and stuff. And also, it's so important if you get caught, 3 years from now and you didn't, cross a T or dot an I, the ramifications would be horrendous of you haven't been paying taxes for 3 years, and you're like, I thought I was doing everything above board. And, maybe you save $50 or $1,000 in the short run, but I would definitely pay for good legal counsel and good accountants to make sure that they're doing everything properly. Okay.
Speaking of which, can you mention who you use? Can people reach out to this person?
I use 2 people. One is, his name is David Nisman, and he is now a friend of mine. But he used to be the U.S. District Attorney in the U.S. Virgin Islands. So he is extremely experienced, and the U.S. Virgin Islands were the first case study of being this kind of like U.S. territory tax haven. So he's seen a ton of case law and just knows his stuff. He's expensive, but worth every dime. And
how do you spell his last name? Nisman?
Nissman.
Okay. All right. Cool.
Yeah. And his son, Alex, actually has this amazing app that tracks automatically, where you are essentially. So using GPS coordinates, either whether you're in Puerto Rico or somewhere in the States. So for the people that are just trying to make the bare minimum, it's a really useful app that, you could show to the IRS essentially at some point, when they come 8 years from now and they're like, hey, did you spend 130 or 183 days back in 2017? You can have this cool little app that's been logging your movements via GPS, and it'd be very difficult to negate that, and it saves you the trouble of keeping all your receipts and your airfare and yada yada yada. And
do they drill in? Do they actually drill down like that? Will they say, hey, we want to see all the flights and make sure that you were actually there for the full 183 days?
From my understanding, yeah, the IRS doesn't mess around about that kind of thing. They haven't had really any audits in Puerto Rico. I believe this year they just had their first, and I don't know the person personally. So it's better safe than sorry in this kind of thing. But they audited a lot of people in the USVIs because everybody was going down there and living there, but they weren't really. And they basically came and tried to get everybody for tax evasion, and they ended up losing most of those cases. The IRS did. Actually, in large part due to this next guy that I'm going to recommend. His name is Lance Talkington. And he's been in the USVIs for a long time and was essentially the accountant for a lot of these people. And he was, I think, the 7th person to move to Puerto Rico for these tax benefits. So he works for a lot of people here, but he's also taking advantage of it himself, and he's seen a lot of this stuff, and he's an accountant, not a lawyer, but he does my accounting, and he's extremely reasonable as far as billing goes, like really reasonable, and just does a killer job. He does my taxes for the year of 2016. He did my taxes in Oregon, finished that out, closed that out, did my taxes here because, you kind of live both places for 1 year. So your tax liability is split between Oregon and Puerto Rico or wherever you're from. But yeah, between those two guys, I couldn't speak higher of them. And I used a few other lawyers and accountants, kind of burning through them and just finding that I knew more about all this than they did, which scared me to pieces. So these two guys are great.
Okay, great. And just to clarify, residency there can be renting, right? You don't have to own a property. Is that right?
For Act 20, yeah, you don't have to own. For Act 22, one of the stipulations is you need to buy a house within 2 years of living there. So that's one of the stipulations. And one of the other stipulations is you can't have, this needs to be your primary residence. So let's say, you live here in this tiny little 1-bedroom and your wife and kids live in a mansion back in Florida, and you're barely spending 183 days here, and you go back, you wouldn't really want to do that in good faith. You really, if you're going to move down here, kind of move your life down here. There's good schools for kids. There's that kind of thing. You basically have to prove to the IRS that you are innocent. In the event of an audit, you're kind of guilty until proven innocent. So, definitely talk to your tax advisor. Make sure that you're willing to do this, and then commit. And it's great. I love it.
It sounds awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to come out there and check it out for sure.
Yeah.
So if you could go back 5 years and talk to yourself, what advice would you give you?
Oh, God. That's a good question. To be honest, I don't really have any regrets, or I don't think I'd do anything differently. My path has been what it's been, for good or for bad, and I like my life now, and with the good and with the bad, and life's what it is.
That's great. That's good. So, guys, we've been speaking with John Hadden, a guy who has been crushing it now with his business to the point where he's made a smart choice to move to a place where he now only pays 4% taxes, maybe less with everything else that's going on. Who knows? But yeah, it sounds really cool. We're going to be tagging John in the video in the FBA High Rollers group, so that if you guys have any questions, you can reach out to him. If you're not part of that member or that community, please do so. There's 27,000 Amazon sellers in there, probably more by the time you watch this or listen to this. And we'd love to have you in there talking to other Amazon sellers as well. So, John, thank you so much for coming on the show.
Not a problem.
It's been an eye-opener. This has been really cool. And beers are on me when I come out.
Cool.
Make sure you slam the subscribe button, give that video a thumbs up, and share it. One final thing, if you want the most badassical Chrome extension for Amazon sellers, download the Helium 10 Chrome extension for free at helium10.com. The link is also in the description. What other topics would you like us to cover? Write them below in the comments.
For more information, insider tools, and to get the resources mentioned in this episode, visit AMPMpodcast.com.